An internet presentation titled, "Were the Pyramids Built Before the Flood?" is a veiled attempt to discredit and dismiss the Old Testament Hebrew text, the King James Bible, the Standard Bible Chronology, and creation science, which helps to expose the faulty theory of evolution. The strange Bible chronology the presentation puts forth is based on errors in 3 scarcely used and obscure critical texts: the faulty Greek Septuagint, and the Samaritan Pentateuch, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. These additions contradict the entire body of often used and copied Hebrew manuscripts, whose readings are now seen in the King James Bible. The presenter of this video begins with a bald error regarding the source of the Hebrew text underlying the King James Bible. He graphically wrongly shows the King James coming from the Leningrad Codex. Referring to that codex, the presenter says, "All our Bibles are translated from this corrupted copy of the Hebrew." In fact, only modern versions use the Leningrad text, which is the foundation of their underlying corrupt biblical Hebraica Stuttgartensia. The King James Bible never used the Leningrad Codex, which was initially assessed for biblical criticism in 1937, 300 years after the King James Bible was written. She covers all this in this book right here. What is this one, 25 bucks or something? $24. It's fabulous on the topic of which Bible version you should be using. Of the Hebrew Old Testament text, Romans 3 says, "Unto them were committed the oracles of God," talking about the Hebrews. The Hebrews, not the Greeks or Samaritans, were charged with preserving the Old Testament Hebrew text. The Jews have never accepted either the Greek Septuagint or the Samaritan Pentateuch. The internet presentation, called "Were the Pyramids Built Before the Flood?" bases its entire thesis and chronology on these 2 wobbly and corrupt documents, which even secular scholars admit are highly corrupted. To present these 2 untrustworthy texts pretend that they represent an old text. The presenter misrepresents the age, date, and origin of these 2 texts. So since she talks about 3 blind mice, following 3 blind mice, the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Septuagint, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, it gives a history of each one of them here. So we'll get the whole thing up there, but those of you that have sent me copies of that video claiming we need to throw out the King James because they're missing 100 years in each of those names, no, they're not. They're exactly correct as preserved. Let me get to home, and I'll give a quick why the King James, and here's the story behind that. Satan started his career, first words out of his mouth in the Garden of Eden. We're trying to get people to doubt God's word. Yea, hath God said. Eve, you sure God said that? And Psalm 12 in the King James says, "The words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. Thou shalt keep them." What does the "them" refer to? The words. "Thou shalt keep them, O Lord, thou shalt preserve them from this generation forever." If you read it in the NIV, the non-inspired version, it says, "The words of the Lord are flawless, like silver purified in a furnace of clay, purified 7 times. O Lord, you will keep us safe and protect us from such people." What? Protect us from such people? No, he promised to preserve his words. Well, they can't say he's going to preserve his words because they just got done changing thousands of them to make the NIV. So they don't want to say that. What happened was, shortly after the time of Christ, the New Testament books were written. Copies were made by the thousands and spread all over the world. They were very careful. It takes about 10 months to write out a copy of the Bible. Starting in the 1300s, they began translating these texts into English. King James is the 7th attempt to translate into English, the 7th purification, I believe. And they used 95% of the Tyndale Bible because they thought this is near perfect. Just made a few little minor changes. Okay, meanwhile, down in Egypt, there was a cult known as the Alexandrians. Origen is the guy that they talk about here, and about 184 AD he was born. He did a corrupt text. He left out stuff he didn't like out of the Bible and started a cult down in Egypt. Alexandria, there's nothing good in Alexandria. Nothing good comes out of Egypt, period, in the Bible. Alexandria, they're the folks disputing with Stephen in the book of Acts chapter 6. That's the first mention of Alexandria.